That music always makes me want to dance. So, welcome to my weekly YouTube live stream. Sorry, I'm off center here, trying to get myself over here. And if you are new to this live stream, I'm Darlene with Digital Photo Mentor. And each week here on my YouTube channel, I demonstrate photo editing using subscriber submitted images. I noticed that Marty's already here in the chat, and I have your image up first, Marty. So I'm going to get into Lightroom. Tell us in the chat where you're joining from and if it's your first time here. And I'm going to jump into Lightroom and get started. But first, I just wanted to mention, you'll see that I have a little slide on the screen here. I'm also doing a Photoshop class later this week on Thursday, the 14th, 3 p.m. Eastern time. And Rob's going to be dropping some links and information for that into the chat for you if you are interested in coming and taking Photoshop class with me. So without further ado, I'm going to switch over to Lightroom. Whew, okay. There we go. All right, let's see who's here. Trish, I think I have one of your pictures as well. Marty from Wisconsin, great to see you. Sheila, things are good here, Sheila. I've got your images for Monday. I'm saving those for our Luminar class. And who else is here taking the Luminar class? I noticed a lot of familiar names. So as you can see on the screen, I've got a few images that had been submitted over the last week. If you want to be able to participate in this editing, I see Brandon's here as well, also from my Luminar course. And for some reason, I can't see the whole chat. Bjorn, yes, I have your images as well. Hello. 7 a.m. for you, Trish. Yeah, I can't get to the bottom of my chat. Oh, there we go. Vicky, also from Edmonton, welcome. So it's great to see some regulars. It's nice to have you all come back. Ken, welcome. What I'm going to do with these images today is just walk you through how I would approach editing. And my workflow is I start in Lightroom, and then I hop over to Luminar. Used to be Luminar AI, and now predominantly Luminar Neo, because we are, I'm doing a class on that right now. We finish up on Monday. So if you want to get in on that, you still can as well. There's lots of lessons there that are recorded, and all of my students who are in the chat here could tell you how much they're enjoying it. We've had a ball working together. So let me take a look at this first one, because this one is Marty's image. Now, I want to tell you a little story, Marty, because when we got this image, we kind of did a little double take, because one of our early images when I first started doing this weekly live was this one by a guy named Phil. And I want to put these up on the screen together because we literally thought they were the same image. And I'm sure like it's the same tree. Look at that. Let me turn on my little pointer here. Same tree. He's got a slightly higher camera angle, but it's the same mountain, right? How coincidental is that you know, you guys took virtually almost the same shot and submitted it they both to me. I think that's incredibly coincidental. So I've got your original image, the one that you did as your edit. And I've already done one edit, but I'm going to walk through how I got to that. Okay. And I know you're doing the Luminar course. So I'm actually going to use Luminar Neo, but I'll use a combination of Lightroom and Neo. Can you tell me, Marty, are you using Lightroom as predominantly your main, or is Luminar Neo your only editing, right? So this is what you did, Marty, and it's very colorful, very vibrant, right? That's what I did. And now that I'm looking at it, I actually want to scale the greens back even more, because I find that mine is still too vibrant for my liking, right? So I like to keep the greens a little bit more neutral. But I want to point out the main difference here is that your top of your mountain is really bright. And it's not clipping, right? Like if I go in here and look at the clipping warnings, it's not off the chart, but it's really bright, okay? And what I did with it in the final version is I darkened the valley because it's a little bit more in shadow and evened them out a little bit without getting rid of all the shadows and kept the highlights a little bit darker. Okay? So I'm going to walk you through how I did this in Luminar. I'm going to start with this one here in Lightroom. Okay, so did you let me know? Definitely Lightroom as your main. Okay, perfect. So this is my process, Marty. So the first thing I do is I always look at my camera profiles first, right? And make sure the histogram is on because I use that as a reference a lot. Okay, so in this histogram, I see that there's a spike over to the left. So there's lots of dark stuff, but it's not off the graph. And there's lots of light stuff, but also not off the graph. So the contrast range is manageable. Okay. You could have done HDR here and picked up more detail in the shadows and the highlights and blended them together. But I think that there's enough here that we can work with. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is look at, are there any other camera profiles? Okay, so these are matching your camera profile, which I believe is Sony. Yeah. Okay, so ARW. Exposure, everything looks good, looks nice and sharp. So I'm going to look at, just by hovering over these profiles, which one gives me the closest to what I'm looking for. Okay, so light actually does a nice job of lightening up the foreground a little bit. Portrait's kind of flat, neutral's kind of flat, standard's kind of flat. And vivid, I almost never start with anything vivid because by the time I add blacks and contrast, it's going to be too over the top. So I'm actually going to start with this one called light and see if that helps. Okay, then I'm going to do some basic global adjustments. So global being applying to the entire image. Okay, so I'm going to drag this one down and you see that's going to do a nice job on the mountains and the background. And look how it opens up these highlights here. Okay, so without it, they're all sort of bunched together. And then when I bring the highlights down, you'll notice that the color in the sky also comes out. Okay, so whenever anything is overexposed or washed out, that's when it's going to lack color. Okay, so as soon as you decrease the highlights and increase the blacks, you're going to get more color. Okay, then I'm going to do my trick for whites and blacks, which is setting what's called the endpoint. So I put my mouse over the word whites, hold the shift key, and then double click, and then the same for blacks. And what that does is it stretches the histogram out so that it's just touching the edges. And if we look at what's clipping now, I can see that there's a little bit of blue coming in there, that means there's black clipping here, which is totally fine because we're actually going to brighten that up. So I'm probably going to come back and add more black. So I don't want the whites to be clipping. If you're doing this manually, I'm pressing the Alt Option key and sliding the slider, and then it shows me what's clipping. So I'm going to drag it up till I get some clipping and then just back down. Okay. Because I don't want clipping in the whites. In the blacks, I do want a bit of clipping. And now overall, it looks a little bit dark. Okay. So now I'm going to go to exposure. So be very careful of using exposure as a correction for the whole image because it's actually your midtones. Okay, watch what happens if I go up to the histogram and grab the middle. Okay, so that's gray. See which slider moves? Exposure. Okay, so exposure is your midtones, nothing else. When I do that, it pushes everything else, the highlights up to the right as well. So we're getting a little bit more highlights coming back. I'm going to check in here for some fringing and chromatic aberration and just check our lens corrections. Okay, so under the lens correction panel, okay, so I've got enable profile, and I'm just going to check off remove chromatic aberration. I don't see any because what I'm looking for is a fringe. Okay, is there any kind of a fringe? I'm just going to turn off the profile thing here. Is there a fringe on the edge of something? So where it would show up is on the edges of the mountains. So anytime there's something dark against something light, on the edges is where it's going to show up. So I don't see anything there. Okay, now enable profile. just corrects for some distortion, okay? And you can see that it was built in. So my Fuji camera does that as well. Okay, so when I imported this image into Lightroom, it automatically had the lens profile applied. In this case, if I want to leave the distortion, I want to turn it down to the left, okay? Because it's actually sort of removing some of the image. And I like the wider scene, and I don't mind the distortion here at all. Although I did later crop out this rock, right? I believe. Let's go part way. So the rock is still cropped out. That looks pretty good. I'm not worried too much about verticals in this image because it's a mountain scene. It's not a building, so I'm not going to worry about that. And I didn't see anything else to worry about for corrections of these kind. So I'm going to go back up to the basic panel and boost the shadows. I'm going to boost the shadows a little bit, but I don't want to go too far. Okay, so what too far looks like is this. Okay, so when you open up the shadows so far that they're actually starting to be the same tone as the midtones and the highlights, okay, that's too far. So I'm just going to open the shadows up a little bit. Bring this back up. Okay, so let's take a look at the before and after. Okay, so I'm getting there. Next, I'm going to do the sky, and there's a couple different ways you can darken the sky. We can go down to HSL and adjust the luminance or brightness of the blues. Okay, I can just pull the slider down, or I can use this little targeted tool. So if I click on it, I get this little crosshairs with a circle and an up and down. So wherever I click and hold, if I drag up and down, it's going to slide the sliders that are affected by whatever color is under my mouse. Okay. And you see when I do that, okay, again, that's too far. That's what too far looks like. It's also affecting the stream. This is where Lightroom's HSL panel is actually at a disadvantage to Luminar Neo's. With Luminar Neo, I can mask it so it only applies to the sky. So I'm actually just going to undo that and not apply luminance. But let's see if I can brighten these trees a little bit. Okay, so a little bit. Probably there's more yellow. Not too bad. Yellow, see what's happening? Yellow is actually in the mountain. Okay, so I was looking at the trees and then the mountain was happening. So I'm going to actually darken it a tiny bit to bring that highlight down. Looks like there's orange at the top of the mountain and over here as well. Okay, so I can bring that down. Go to extremes with your sliders, right? So I was looking at the green of the trees when I was pulling the yellow slider, but go all the way like this and look everywhere to see what it's doing, okay? I want to darken the oranges a little bit, but not too much because it's starting to get muddy at the top here. So I'm just going to go down a little bit, and I might bring the blue and the aqua down a tiny bit, but not too far because it's darkening that stream too much, okay? And I have a feeling that if I go down in this area of the sky, yeah, it's going to be the same color, and I just get more of that starting to be what's called banding, okay? So when you pull your sliders so far that you start to get a dark part in the color in the sky up here, that's often actually caused by a polarizing filter too. So did you have a polarizer on when you did this one, Ken? Let me know. Or sorry, Marty's image. Did you have a polarizer on? Nigel from Bahamas. Ken has a question. If I have a sky that's totally blown out and you tend to replace it, should you do that first before making the sky? Yeah, I am going to replace this sky, but if I bring the detail down in it a little bit, it may replace better or not. Yeah. No, I will always do global adjustments first. Yeah. No polarizer. Okay, interesting. So I wonder if it's just because of the wide angle lens, because often a polarizer will give you that dark bit in the sky. So that's as far as I'm going to go with the luminance here. Let's go. Okay, so our other option is now masking. Okay, so I've done my sort of global edits. I'm going to give it a little bit of clarity. I don't want to do a lot of clarity and a lot of texture up high because you get this kind of look and it affects everywhere again, right? So it's affecting the sky and I don't want to do that. So I like to show extremes like this because this is over edited, okay? So you want to just keep your global edits a little more subtle, okay? Now I'm going to get into masking using the masking tools in Lightroom, and they're really great now. Okay, so if you don't see these, it probably means you don't have the current version of Lightroom Classic, which is I don't even know what version it is now. I think I have to update one. Looks like 11.1 is what I've got. And they added these masking tools, or they changed how masking was done in Lightroom. And they work really great now because they have a select sky option. So I can select the sky, and you can see that it's done a pretty good job, but I'm actually going to just darken it down, right? It's done a pretty good job, but look, it missed a little bit up here, okay? Let me turn this part off. And you see that? So it's kind of left a halo and it missed the little gaps in the trees. And I want to be careful of doing anything to the sky now because it's not getting all of it. And I could go in and add and paint and do all those things, but I'd have to be really, really careful with my painting. So instead, I'm just going to bring the exposure down a little bit and even the saturation and just keep it subtle. Okay. But what I really wanted to do is select the opposite. I want the landscape. Okay. So now that I know that the sky mask does a good job of selecting, I'm just going to add another one. Sorry, I'm trying not to sneeze. And then when I've added it, there's a little button up here at the top, invert. Okay. Now I've got everything except the sky. Okay. So again, it's missing that little bit in the clouds there. But what I want to do is brighten everything. So I want exposure. But when you're brightening things like this that are in the deep shadow, there's a few things you want to do. Okay, so I want to increase the whites. And we're going to see some clipping, but we're going to fix that. We're going to increase the whites because that's going to keep me some contrast. Okay, so I'm not going as much with exposure. I'm also going to give it some yellow because it's very blue compared to the rest of the image. And that's because it's in shadow, right? So I'm going to give the overall bottom part more yellow and more green. So these two sliders often go opposite directions. And this goes back to film and printing in the darkroom, because when you have an image that's cold, which is blue, it usually also has magenta, okay? Because magenta is actually a cool color, right? So try reducing that as well as adding yellow. Okay? So let's see what this one is doing. Okay, see how it's picking that up? Now I can add a bit of contrast. Let's see. Now I can add some clarity and texture because I'm not working on the sky. But again, I don't want to go overboard. So when you go have too much sharpness, your eye won't fall anywhere in the scene because everything is sharp and it's too distracting. So you really want to draw attention to one thing in your image. Okay, so what is the subject here? Is the subject the trees, the mountain, or just the overall landscape of peacefulness? So the subject here could be more ethereal, like peace. Okay, so I am going to just do that. And now you notice that what's happening is the water is brightening up, as is this top mountain. Okay, so I don't really want to brighten those areas. Okay, so I'm going to subtract from this mask, and I'm going to try luminance range. So I'm just going to draw a little square over the water, right? And then I can adjust it. Okay, so I want to see where my overlay is going. So now it's removed it from the water. Do you see that? And off of the mountain. But I have control over how this blends. Okay, so I can move it a little more to the bright areas. So it's only getting those. Okay. Let's make sure I get that shadow in there. something like that. Okay, so let's change my mask color. Sometimes I'll change the mask from green to red. So in this case, there's a lot of green in the picture and it's kind of throwing me off. So I want to make sure I'm masking it the right way. Another way to double check is to just go crazy with your adjustment, right? So there, I just drag my exposure all the way down and now I can see where it's applying and then I can adjust my mask accordingly. Something like that. Okay, see that? So just a little trick. Like that. So now that I've done the masks, I'm going to go back to global. Okay, so once again, I'm going to check for blacks by holding the Alt Option key, dragging it a little further. I'm going to check for whites. Now we've got a little bit of clipping. I'm going to warm up the whole image a little bit as well. And how are we looking? So already, just with those masks, it's done a really nice job. Okay? Maybe a little too warm. Okay, so now I've noticed there's like a kind of a blob over here on the side. Looks like something on your lens here. See that? There's a dark spot. So I'm just going to use the healing tool. We could try the actually let's take it to Luminar and see if the dust spot. Oops. Let's see if the automatic dust spot works on this one. Okay, now I'm looking and it's a bit too green. So I'm constantly looking at things close up and further back. So make sure you zoom in and out. Zoom in to if you're doing any masking. Okay, I may want to crop this a little bit. I noticed that you've cropped it in from the right-hand side, and I may do something completely different, right? So in the after image that I did before, I left the full part on the right, and I did that on purpose because I'm going to show you something. Look at, I've got my Luminar Neo mug. So Marty says, tranquil setting. Yeah, exactly. It is, right? It feels very peaceful. Right? If you had used a polarizer here, you'd probably have gotten more color out of the sky, and possibly the water would have been darker as well. You would have got rid of that. Sheila says she just checked and the latest version of Lightroom is 11.2. So possibly I have an update to do on my Lightroom. And if you are not sure, you can use this little cloud. Oops, I'll search for something, obviously. Okay, so if I go to my apps, it will tell me, yes, indeed, there is an update. Okay, I'm not going to do it now. Okay, note to self and note to anybody, if you're ever demonstrating something, don't update your software right before your demonstration. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so let me show you how I got to this image here. Okay, so I might end up with something that looks completely different. Who knows? All right, so let's take this over to Luminar Neo. I'm going to use a non-destructive workflow this time because the first time I did it, I just went edit in and I took it directly to Neo. If you have the Adobe package, and this is one of the workflows that I showed inside the Luminar Neo course, I believe on lesson 18, is go to Photoshop first. So I'm going to open as a smart object in Photoshop. And I talked about smart objects versus regular layers in my Photoshop class as well. Okay, so it's opening inside of Photoshop. Now, the reason that I'm doing this and I'm opening it as a smart object is it becomes, when you apply Neo or any other plugin, it becomes like a smart filter, right? And I don't know if you can see this. If I zoom in here, there's this little icon at the bottom of the layer, and that indicates that it's a smart object, okay? So now I'm going to go filter and go find Luminar Neo. So I'm applying Luminar Neo as a filter inside of Photoshop. So the extra step by going to Photoshop just allows me to keep this editable. Okay, and you'll see that in a minute. So this is a Lightroom Photoshop Luminar course today. Okay, so now we are inside Neo, and the first thing I'm going to do is try that erase to see if it picks up that dust spot in the sky, if it recognizes it as a dust spot. Because it looks like it's something on your sensor. Ah, it did. See that? I got it. Okay, I'm going to zoom in just to make sure it got it all the way. And there's a tiny little bit of it left, so I'm just going to do another erase here. And we should be able to get rid of that. Perfect. Okay. Of course, if you had more dust spots, then it would be more beneficial to do the automatic, right? One is not so bad. All right. So next thing I wanted to do is I did do the sky replacement, but the ability here to adjust the colors separately and mask them is why one great reason to go over here to Luminar. Okay, I could do the similar kind of thing in Photoshop with an adjustment layer, right, as well as a sky replacement. I just find it easier in Luminar, right? It's more, it's quicker and faster. I could also try the color harmony and the color contrast slider, which is quickly becoming another one of my favorites. So I'm going to drag this one up, and just to see what it does, because I want to get more contrast in the trees. Okay. Now, I did it a different way when I did my other one, but this one is actually way faster. Look at this. So I used my, sorry, I've got cat hair on my face and it's tickling. I used my technique where I did the dodging and burning on the pocket watch in the example that I did in the Luminar Neo course. I did that on this image, but in hindsight, this is way easier, right? Look at the contrast that is doing in the trees, because the trees were flat to me, right? So I'm going to actually warm it up because I don't like the color. So one of my pet peeves, if you've been watching for a while, and I don't know if Holly's here, but I think she's probably going to get a shirt with this on it, is neon puke. Okay, so don't make neon puke. This is what that is right now. Okay, so that is neon puke. Okay, don't do this. So when you do stuff like this, you want to keep it A, subtle, and B, the colors a bit more realistic. So I'm noticing here that this, when it brings up the greens, they tend to go sort of a weird tint, like neon, right? But I also find that shifting it warmer fixes a lot of that. Okay, so I'm shifting it warmer and then bringing this down to something a little bit more realistic. Okay, now it's also adding contrast up in that sky. So let's see. It's picking up contrast in the mountain. So all I'm going to do here is mask it using the erase tool and remove it from this mountain top because I don't need more contrast there. Okay, there's lots of contrast there already. Let's just bring that down. And I usually do zoom in and do smaller brushes and zoom in tighter when I'm doing any kind of brush work. So I went into 50%. And if you have like a Wacom tablet or something that is graphics tablet where you can use a paintbrush or a brush pen tablet instead, that's even better for doing your brush work. Okay, now let's see what this is doing. Okay, look at how it's picking up that rock as well. I like that, but I'm just going to minimize it. Okay, so just by changing the strength down to lower than 30, I can just remove it a little bit, right, partially. And I can also do that over here because this grass over here is really grabbing my attention now, and I want to keep the focus more towards the river. Okay, so I'm going to just remove that from there. And also potentially this tree up here because it's really grabbing my eye. Okay, potentially down here. So anywhere where I want to not have this being applied. Okay. So see how I did the overall and then took it down even further, okay? Let's take a look at split color warmth. So the warm slider will increase the warmth, of already warm colors. So the orange of the rock, the trees. So I think a tiny increase there is good. Cool is going to cool things off. So we can make an apocalyptic sky. Okay. So it just makes more blue in the sky. And that actually does a really good job. So look what this one tool is doing. Okay. It's doing a really great job, and I don't have to do a lot of brush work. So color harmony was great. Another one that's often great is the enhance slider. Okay, so see how that one does the same or similar job in the foreground, but it doesn't give me the option of shifting the color. So I'm not going to use that one. I prefer the one that I just added, the color harmony. I am going to go try landscape, okay, because that's going to give me this golden hour or this foliage enhancement. Again, this is neon puke, okay? So don't make that. But I'm turning it up high just to see what it's doing. And I always shift this slider left. I find that the middle point that they've started with is too blue, okay? I would have liked them to start a bit more this way, but it's easy to adjust. So let's see if we even want this one to apply. Okay, it does a nice job as well, right? And I can't wait for us to be able to copy masks in here. Currently we can't. We can invert it, but I'd love to be able to copy the mask that I just did on the color harmony tool over to here and keep it off of the sky. But I'm not going to worry about it because I know I'm going to do a replacement. Let's add a little vignette. Okay, so we seem to be having a full-on demonstration with Marty's image today, but there's lots of good stuff in here. Okay. I don't mind the position of that, so I'm just going to feather it more. See how that's darkening the edges. And let's do our sky replacement. The one that I chose, actually it might be this one right here, was built into, it is that one. It was built into Luminar, okay? So I didn't have to go and add anything. I want to make sure that it's covering the horizon and that it's doing a good job through these trees here, okay? So I'm going to check the horizon, and those are your mask refinements. Okay, so I'm checking that it's down far enough. So it blends actually really nicely with the original sky, so I don't even have to worry about that. But now I can decide, okay, do I want to shift it a little bit? Right, so I can shift it left to right. And I think if I go back to my other one in Lightroom, I did shift it because I didn't want it overlapping that tree. Okay, so let's go back over here. So that's exactly what I did, right? So I just moved it over so it's not on this tree here. Something like that. Let's zoom in, see how it's doing over here. I think it's done a good job. So I still see some blue. I do see a little bit of a color fringe now, so I might be able to take care of that with the develop tool. So it looks pretty good. I can do fixed details, which might help in there as well. And now let's do a scene relighting. So be careful with this one. If I've done all my color corrections, it's going to add a lot of blue and darkness now because I've just added a darker sky. I want to make sure I'm getting the reflection in the water. It is picking up a little bit in there, so that's good. Atmospheric haze is one that I use often as well, and it just sort of makes the sky a little bit softer so that it's not so contrasty, I guess. And I might even darken it a tiny bit. But you see that as I affect the sky, because I have the relight turned up high, whatever I'm doing in the sky is going to happen in the foreground. Okay, so when I brighten it, the foreground gets brighter. When I darken it, the foreground gets darker. So I'm actually going to brighten that sky and keep the haze. And let's see what it's doing. So it blends really well, and it gets rid of that problem of the glow at the horizon. Okay. So let's see a before and after. Okay. Could I have done all of those things in Lightroom? Yes, except for the clouds. Could I have done those things in Photoshop? Yes, as well. Again, probably multiple layers, some dodge and burn layers. You can do a sky replacement, okay, as well. I just find Luminar Neo is more user-friendly and more fun. And then, of course, you know what my favorite's going to be is a little bit of mystical. Because this image is, we want that sort of serenity. Let's lift the shadows a little bit there. You can even warm it up here. So Neo gives you lots of opportunity to shift the color if you find that your color is not quite right. I think I'm happy with that. So I'm going to apply it and come back to Lightroom. Let's see how we're doing here. Sheila likes my water bottle. Yes, Skylam sent it to me as a lovely gift because I'm an ambassador. I'm sure you typed just fine, Sheila, and I got the message there. Yes. Okay, so let's come back. So now we're back in Photoshop, and you can see that Luminar Neo has been applied as a filter. Okay, so I can keep going in Photoshop. I can do whatever else I want. But for now, I'm done with this one. Okay, so I'm just going to save it and close it. There we go. I always use my keyboard shortcuts. Rob, if you wanted to share, we have a link to Lightroom keyboard shortcuts and Photoshop keyboard shortcuts. This is closing and coming back to Lightroom. So if you haven't already gotten those, if you could share the keyboard shortcuts link, please, Rob. Yeah, it does. And like I said, if I wanted to shift the color of the trees, I could do that with the color tool and mask it in using the HSL in Luminar, but I can't do that in Lightroom. So the HSL tool, I think, is more powerful inside of Neo. For me, Photoshop has its place, and I agree, Ken, and that's why I like Luminar Neo, and it's part of my workflow. Do I use Photoshop sometimes? Yes, but generally not for tonal control and stuff like this. Where I'll use Photoshop is if I need to do more complex stuff like layered images, light painting, combining two images, doing a head swap, things like that. But if I have a portrait, I'm going to Neo. If I have something like this, I'm going to Neo. Okay? And Rob has shared the shortcut links in the chat for you if you want to get my Lightroom keyboard shortcuts and my Photoshop keyboard shortcuts. So those of you in the Neo course, you've already got the Luminar ones. Okay? So let's take a look and see what I did here. And I'm actually going to crop it. So let's look at the four of them together. Okay, so this one up on the top left is the edit that I did coming out of Lightroom. This is the one I just did. And this is the one I did a few days ago just to play around with this image. Okay, so it looks like I made it a little bit darker the first time. Okay. There's Marty's edit. And that's what I did the first time. So all I did was darken that mountain a little bit. And I could have done that in this edit as well. I probably would have used the super contrast, actually, or the color tool and just masked it in. Okay, so now I'm going to show you something else that I wanted to do with this image. Okay, and I'm going to do it on this one because I'm actually going to flip it. Okay, so we know that the image goes the other way, and it if you know that scene, you know that that's what that looks like. When you have a scene like this that you can get away with flipping that isn't recognizable, because the reason I did that is these trees, these logs that are down here on the, well, originally on the right, are now on the left, and they actually become a leading line. So they lead you in to the river, and the river leads you over to the mountain, and then you stay in the image. So you get this really sort of circular motion of your eyes happening, okay? And now the clouds going this direction are even adding to that. So your eye comes in, wanders up here, catches on the bright areas, right? And then I want to come back down to this tree because, again, the line is leading me back down to the tree and the river, okay? So let's compare the two, okay, in terms of, oops, cropping. Let's just see. I'm curious. Take a vote now. Do you prefer, oh, apparently I flipped that one as well. Did I flip them all? I guess I flipped them all. Oops. Let's undo. There we go. Okay, let's try that. I flipped them all. Okay, so now which one do you prefer? Left or right? Let me see. It comes back in as whatever format you set up in your preferences in Lightroom, Trish. And for me, that's a PSD. So I have the layers. Okay. So if you want to keep layers, it has to be either a TIFF or a PSD. The great thing about Photoshop is you're able to use this plugins as smart objects. Exactly. Right. That's exactly why I do it that way, Ken. Similarity with the other photo, the park ranger offered an early morning hike along the Virgin River. The other photographer was higher on the bank. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Your light is actually, I like your light better as well, Marty, because you've got this light on the top of the mountain. It's called Alpenglow. So you can definitely tell it was either early morning or late afternoon. Sheila likes the flip. Sheila's voting for the flip, as is Vicky. Trish prefers the original. Barbara votes for the flip. And Marty says, I should mention, I really liked how you use Neo to handle the greens. I've never been completely happy with how I handled them. Awesome. Well, now you know how to tackle this one. So I'd love to see you try and replicate this as well, Marty. And you can certainly share that in the Facebook group. So you don't have to flip it. And it looks like, the votes are split on this one. But definitely you see more leading lines, okay? Here, your eye doesn't get to the river until halfway through, right? So the sticks here are leading your eye out. So I totally get why you cropped it out, Marty. I totally get why you cropped it out. Okay, even this one, though, I would say overall, you just need to darken everything a little bit and bring those highlights down. The yellow on the mountain is a little intense as well. So I would probably use the HSL or whatever you've done here to create this. Make sure that you bring the luminance down on that mountain area. Yeah, see it's yellow, but I can't do it in Lightroom without adjusting everything else. Okay? So if I wanted to do it in Lightroom, I would have to do a mask, and I might just use a radial gradient here over the mountain, and then just lower the highlights. Okay. I want to make sure I'm not getting the sky. So it's a bit trickier to get it here. I'd have to do some masking magic because it is getting the sky, but it's really picked up a lot of contrast, and that's what you want to try and minimize there on the mountain. Okay. All right, let's see what else we got. Let's see. We have another one of Ken's. So this was one that you had sent me as well. You wanted to see what I had done with this one. And this was Kenneth's edit. And that's what I've done. Okay. So I've done I've done this in Lightroom, but we're going to start back with the original and see how I did that. Okay. It's also, I felt like it was crooked, Ken. So you always want to make sure you adjust based on the horizon. So if you use well, that's interesting. So there you go. Did you know that you could change your overlay in the crop tool? Okay, so if you don't see the rule of thirds, press O and your overlay will change. Right, so you can actually see different crops, a full grid, and things like the Fibonacci sequence. Fibonacci. So I'm just going to use the ruler inside the crop tool and drag it along the horizon. See, it cropped it, straightened it a little bit, but to me, it still feels crooked, and I can't figure out why. Okay, so that's what I did. Let's go back to the beginning. Okay. Now, are you using mostly Lightroom, Luminar? What are you using, Ken? Awesome, Marty. I can't wait to see what you come up with on this second go. Merle says he prefers the original. Marguerite likes the flip version. So yeah, split decision. That's totally fine. Ken, if you let me know what you're using for your software, I can look that up on here as well. Sorry, I've got my Google Sheet. Here we go. Sorry, let me just find, I'm looking for Ken's notes here. Okay. Did you say which pro software you're using, or are you going to make me look it up, Ken? Let's see. Lightroom Classic. Okay. He's using Classic. File edits in Neo. Okay, perfect. So that's what I'm going to do then. So let's do the camera profile. Interesting. What camera are we using here? Lumix. Okay, because I didn't recognize these camera profiles. Let's see what Panasonic has. Okay, so again, I tend to stay away from Vivid just because I know I'm going to add more color. Scenery is kind of interesting. Look at that. It kind of gives a deeper cinematic. Interesting. I like the scenery mode. Let's see how close I can get to my other edit. Okay. Now, I showed you the way of straightening this image with the crop tool. I'm going to go down and use transform and see if I click level, if it does a good job. Okay, so see it did that same tilt. I'm actually going to see about doing auto. I'm just going to try it one more time. Okay, so it did about the same. If I try and correct the verticals, actually that's not bad. What I'm having trouble with is that this middle post doesn't look straight. So if I straighten the horizon, the middle post doesn't look straight. So if I take this line here and just draw it completely on the edge of this post, oh, it is straight. Okay, so it's obviously tricking my eyes. So based on that, I'm going to go with what it says then. Let's go back to level. There we go. I'm going to crop it a little bit as well, but I'll come back to that. So let's adjust this highlights. Again, there's a spike over here. So I'm going to bring the highlights down because I know that's going to give me more color in the sky. Okay. And then I'm going to do the double click whites, double click blacks. Okay. Now with a subject like this, I know we had talked about HDR last week, Ken, I think on one of your other images, and I ended up not doing HDR with it. When you have a subject like this that is completely silhouetted, you have to make a decision. Do you want detail in the subject, or do you want to just go silhouette? And for me on this one, I think I much prefer it just as the shape and darkening it to a silhouette. Okay. So I actually chose not to bring detail out in this thing, this pier, I guess. Okay. I am going to crop it a little bit, and I'm going to go freeform so I can come in a little bit from the bottom. Not too much. I want to leave the sand there, but I want to put this thing a little bit more off center. Okay. So I want to see if I can, if I do that, the sun is kind of over here on the thirds. I don't know. It still feels crooked to me. Does it feel tilting to anybody else? Like I want to do that. Like that's what I want to do. That feels straighter to me. Anybody else feel like it's crooked? And so I could crop off from the left a little bit, or I could crop from the right. But I kind of, let's put the sun off center. Does anybody else see the tilt that I'm seeing? Like now the horizon's crooked, but it feels straighter to me for some reason because of that pier. I'm not sure why. See that? Like it's crooked. It is crooked, but it looks straighter. It felt straighter the other way. So when I'm using this, I'm using the crop tool and I just click outside of it, and then you get this grid. And now I'm looking at the lines that are going horizontally and matching up with the horizon, as well as the edge of this post here. And it's tricking my eyes because it definitely, the post is vertical 100%, as is the horizon. So I think it's just an optical illusion because of the converging lines, right? The wave and the horizon are not completely parallel. Oh, interesting. Well, I was trying to use the horizon. Yeah, there's something in there that's definitely tricking my eyes. The red dress and the yellow building. So for those not doing the Luminar Neo cars, that's what Sheila is referring to. It's an image that we did inside of the Luminar Neo cars. Okay, so now I've got this image. Let me do. Why is it not doing before? There we go. Aha. Okay, so I need to fix this. I've got Ken's before, Ken's image as the history. Okay, so in the snapshot, when I do before, I'm getting your edit, Ken. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a full reset and set my history. Oops. So that the snapshot of the before is actually this step, right? So I just did a little, there we go. That's better. Right, so now before and after. Still looks crooked to me, and I want to straighten it a little more this way. Let's go with that. Right. So I've added contrast and darkness as opposed to brightening underneath the pure, right? So the whites here, you'll notice that the sun is clipping, the sun itself, which is fine, right? That's a light source, right? Don't ever try to get full detail in the sun because you'll get, sort of weird colors. So I don't mind the sun clipping. I like the pure clipping and a little bit of black. And then I can just give it a tiny bit of clarity. Now I'm going to go into the sky masking and see how it does here. So I want to darken the sky even more. So I'm going to use exposure and highlights. May you see the difference? And I'm starting to get some weird color over here. But the neat thing about doing this adjustment with the mask this way in Lightroom is that I can have color adjustments as well. So I could add more yellow. See what that does? Now you have to be careful here because we're starting to get way too much saturation there. I could add some magenta to make it more red. Or I could actually just add a color. I'll show you that. So if you go down to this box down here where it says color and you click the X, you can literally just pick a color. Okay, so I can make the sky bluer, purple, apocalyptic, or a little more orange and yellow. Okay, so I liked that idea. And I like what it's doing at the top of the sky. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. And then I'm going to come back to the HSL panel and deal with that saturation. Okay. Let's see about darkening it a little bit more. See, when I just darkened it without adding that color, this part of the sky went sort of gray. So that's why I added that color. Now let's go to HSL, saturation. I can use the targeted tool, and I just want to bring the yellows down. I don't want to go there like that. Okay. Again, everything has to blend and be subtle. See that? Perfect. So let's see. Are we getting a fringe in here? Okay, I thought I saw maybe a chromatic aberration, and there is a tiny bit. So I'm going to go down to lens corrections and remove chromatic aberration. Let me just zoom in a little more because I want to make sure you guys are seeing what I'm seeing here. Right? Do you see this little red outline along the edge here? Okay, that's chromatic aberration. It's either chromatic aberration or what's called a fringe. So I find that the tools in Neo, the remove fringe, does a really good job on this kind of thing. Right? And Lightroom, I find the chromatic aberration tool does a better job. So see, just by checking it off, if you want to see if there's a fringe, Lightroom generally is looking for a purple or a green fringe. And I don't see one here. You could grab this eyedropper, and then if there is a purple fringe, you literally just click on it, okay? So it's telling me it didn't see a fringe. So doing this and doing this little adjustment here with the chromatic aberration usually sharpens your image as well, because what chromatic aberration is it's your lens not focusing all three colors evenly, red, green, and blue. So just by checking that off, you'll get more sharpness. Let's see what color or profile corrections do. Okay, also built into this one. Okay, so it's already done its job. So that's kind of where I'm at now. I'd also like to intensify the water a little bit. So I want to see what it says if I choose subject. I'm going to see what the program selects as the subject. Okay, so it's selected the pier. Now, if I want, actually thinking about how to get the water selected, I could do it a couple of different ways, right? I could say, okay, I'm going to flip it and then just remove the sky, and that will give me kind of most of the water in the sand, but then that's not exactly what I want either. I'm going to give the pier a little more texture while I'm here, so a little bit of clarity and texture, and just a tiny bit of shadow boost, but not much. Okay. So then I'm going to do another mask, and I'm going to try luminance range. So luminance range is brightness range, and the water is mostly sort of all the white bits. So I'm just going to you draw a square. Okay. Now you notice that it's selected. I'm going to use the green this time. This is just for the mask. It's selected part of the sky and part of the sand. Now the neat thing here is that I could just say, subtract from this mask the sky. So we know that it did a good job selecting the sky before. Now it has removed the sky. Okay. Now it's also got a little bit of the pier. Okay. So then I could go subtract subject. So now I should get exactly what I wanted. Okay. So the water and this part on the sand. Okay. With the luminance range, I also have the option of adjusting it like I did before. So if I don't want the sand to be selected so much, I can blend it a little bit differently, or bring this down so it's not getting the dark areas, and so on. So you have full control over how this mask is working. Okay. But see how the steps, do you see the steps that I went through and thinking it through? It's like, okay, luminance range will give me the water. Then it had some of the sky, so minus the sky. Then it had some of the pier, minus the pier. Okay. And then I went back and adjusted the part. Now that I have it selected, I'm going to add a bunch of clarity. And I might even add some whites. Now, you can't get clipping warnings here when you hold the Alt key, but you can press J on your keyboard, and now you see the clipping warnings in blue on the darks and white on the whites. So I'm going to actually increase the whites. See, now I'm getting some clipping there. So I'm going to increase the whites until I get some clipping. There's a tiny little bit of red showing up there. But what that's doing is it's increasing the contrast of the water. Okay? Then I'm going to add some blacks. So see what that's doing? Look at the water. Okay. And likewise, I added yellow to the sky. I'm going to add blue to the water. Okay, that's a little too much. I'm going to bring it down. So up higher is more saturated. I'm going to find the color that I like somewhere in there, and then just bring it down a little bit. Okay. So let's see what this one is doing. See what it's doing to the water? It's increasing the contrast, clarity, and giving it more blue. Okay. I could also increase the texture. Ooh, texture does a nice job. Look at that. Let's zoom in a little bit. Let's see what texture is doing on the water. See that? That's cool. Okay. Closing the mask. And that's where we're at now. So I could take this one over to Luminar to do some final touches. I might add a vignette here before we do that. Okay, again, the disadvantage of the Lightroom vignette is it has to be centered. You can't off-center it. So if you want an off-centered mask in Lightroom, all you need to do is do a radial filter, right, or radial mask. So I'm just adjusting the size. And in this case, centered is okay. I just want to darken the edges a little bit. And I want to keep my feather really high and just do just ever so slightly. Let's see what that's doing. Okay. All right, now let's go to Neo. Actually, now that I've done all of this, I'm going to bring the exposure back up. Okay, so now, again, it's a dance, right? So I lowered the highlights and I lowered the exposure on the full image. But once I've done some editing to different parts of it and darkened the sky, I came back and adjusted the overall exposure. Let's go. In this case, I just want to do a finishing touch. So I don't think I'm going to go back to Photoshop or I'm going to need to go back to Neo again. So I'm just going to go directly from Lightroom to Neo. And that's kind of my workflow and my decision making as to, do I just want to apply a finishing touch or am I doing a whole bunch of stuff? All right, let's see what we're missing here. Yeah, that's my challenge too, Marla, is I think it's tricking my eye. But the one in the center definitely is vertical. So that's the one I want to be straight up and down. Barbara. Thanks, Barbara. Well, I could put some rum in my coffee. I've got a tiny little bit of rum left. And rum in your coffee is a very Cuban, very Colombian thing to do. Or tequila, whatever works for you, Vicky. Yeah, the last Lightroom edit did an amazing job with the masking. So we actually have a full class on just the masking tools that I did. Actually, Pete Vandenine, who is a Photoshop certified expert. He's from, he's a Dutch, where the heck is he? Is he in Belgium or is he in the Netherlands? I forget where he is. I think he's in Belgium. If you could share the link to our Lightroom masking course with him, that would be great. Vicky thinks that Ken and I make a great team. Awesome. Thanks for that. Hey, Stephanie. We're working on one of Ken's images right now. And Sheila already knows what I'm going for in Luminar, but maybe we'll try some other things too. Awesome, Ken. The replay will be available on this as well as soon as it's done. So I'm going to keep going in Luminar and see what I come up with this one. So my Luminar is opened over here. Oh, I need to resize it. Oh, it's not going to fit on the window for me. Okay, I got a little trick here because my Luminar won't fit on the screen because I have to resize it differently. But we're going to just work with it the way it is because I can't shut down and reboot my computer right now. So I'm definitely going for the mystical. Sheila, you are right. So I'm going to do a little bit of mystical. Not too much this time. And I don't even know if I can get to these bottom tools here. Actually, let me just see if I can share my screen a different way. We're going to try something different on here. Okay, I'm going to try share screen. Aha, okay, here we go. Can you guys see my Neo now? Yes, okay, so now I fixed it. All right, now I'm going to go to color harmony again. And because color harmony works great when you have complementary colors like this, where we've got the orange and the blue. So I'm going to drag this up higher. And then let's see. See, as I drag that, I get darker yellow and more contrast in the water. Okay, so that's doing some really cool things. Brilliance is kind of saturation in this slider. I'm not sure why they called it brilliance, but I'm actually going to turn it down a little bit. And then let's see about making the cools cooler. So that's going to make the water more blue. Okay. See that? So that's intensifying what we've just done. Again, I'm being really careful not to oversaturate that yellow and make it be really glaring yellow. So I'm going to go back to my color tool and HSL, saturation, and just dial the yellow back a tiny bit, maybe even orange. See, the orange is affecting sort of the whole sky. See the difference? And the yellow is the sun. So I'm just going to take it down a tiny little bit on both. Right? I'm always just looking at it going, okay, is it too far? Okay. I'm going to do structure on this one. And I'm just going to have a play here because I want to bring out, again, more texture in this water and the sand. Look at what that's doing here. So I'm going to use the texture quite high and a big brush. And I'm just going to paint it into this area because I really like what's happening in the sand here for texture. Let's see what structure is doing. See that in the reflection? It's really bringing out these little lines in the water here. That's great. And remember, if you're not familiar with these, the boost one is more like an HDR type of structure. Okay, so if I leave structure at 0 and just do boost, say that, versus this one. So together, they actually do a really good job here. Very nice. Let's see if Luminar thinks this is straight. Okay, I'm going to go to the crop tool, straighten horizon. See, now look what it did. See, so it's not just my eyes. I think it's trying to straighten these ones in the middle here. So look what Luminar did as compared to what Lightroom and our eyes did. So it's definitely playing a trick somewhere. So I'm going to undo that. Okay, so it's not just me. I feel a little better. Ken, are you still here? Do you see what I've done in Luminar? So now we've got just a little bit of extra texture down in here. And honestly, I think that's probably all I want to do here. We could go in and see about adding a mood, which is a LUT, and see if there's anything that sort of works. If you want to share the video I did for the Freedom LUTs, please, Rob, because they came out with some Freedom LUTs from Skylum. Let me just find them. So a LUT is a lookup table which adds a colored grading to your image, and they added some in their marketplace to represent Ukraine. So they're the colors of different cities of Ukraine, and a lot of them have some yellow. I'm trying to remember now. I did do a cheat sheet for this one, and I can't bring that up on my screen right now, but let me just grab it from my own personal reference here. Okay, so the Land of Freedom ones, I'll share it with you on a moment after I get out of this screen here. I'm going to try the Dnipro. I'm going to murder all this pronouncing of these. Dnipro, because it has a lot of orange and yellow. All right, so see, that's doing that. I'm going to try, it's too much orange for me. Let me try another one. And I'm looking at my little sheet here. Let's try Kiev. I've recently learned that it's pronounced Kiev, not Kiev. Okay, see how they spell it slightly differently? Ooh, I think I like that one. That's actually kind of cool. So it's taking away the blue from the water, but it's giving us more orange. That's kind of neat too. I'll try one more. This last one. See, I like playing with stuff like this just to see what it does. Okay, so this one's adding more contrast and giving us a different kind of blue. That's not bad either. Okay, so just a slightly different look. I don't mind that. So play around with LUTs and don't be afraid to experiment, right? There's fully regular, the default LUTs. If you don't have the Freedom ones, there's lots to choose from in the default ones. There's one that goes crazy yellow. I know which one that is. It's Auckland. I've never found one that this looks good on. Let's see if it looks good here. Okay, so see how it's crazy yellow? It's like apocalyptic. But does it Does it do anything nice here? Kind of undoes what I've done over the water, but it gives a nice color to the sky and everywhere else. So if I was going to use that one, I would probably just mask off the water. And I think I like that last one that I did, this one. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that one. Not even going to try. Yeah, I like what that's doing, just a little bit subtle. And we're going to go, did I do mystical? No, I've forgotten. I did that first. Okay. So now I'm going to go back to Lightroom. And I'm just going to change my screen share here and go back over to my other screen. Well, that was kind of fun. I never screen shared that way before. And I want to show you these proof sheets that I made for the Luts. So what I was looking at, and you guys couldn't see yet, was this. So the Land of Freedom Luts are these ones here. And what I did was I just applied them to two different images so you can really see what the colors are doing. Let me go full screen on this one. So you can get an idea. And I looked at this one that it had some nice blue in the highlights. And this one was the yellow one that I tried. Okay. I think the Kiev one was nice as well. Okay, so that's my proof sheet on the Freedom Luts. And then I've done the same with the default ones. And they're in order of which they appear. So look at here, Anaheim, Bakersfield, Long Beach. It's the same in the order of the pull down menu inside of Luminar Neo. Okay. All right, let's go back to Lightroom and see what we come up with. So let's do, I want to do a few different versions here. So this is the one that I'd come up with in Lightroom when I edited it the other day. That's Ken's version. And this is the one that I just brought back from Luminar. So it's a little punchier. If I look at this one, comparative, I'm just going to reset this one so we can do a comparison. Let's look at the 4 together. Actually, let's do the 3. Right? So original, I think they're backwards. This is the Luminar edit, and this is my Lightroom edit from the other day. Okay, so neither is right or wrong. It's just different. So I interpreted it differently the second time, and I added more blue and yellow. Maybe I'm feeling very solidarity with Ukraine, so I wanted more blue and yellow. And then I did the other day where I added more red. Okay, so the difference being is that I approached it from a different perspective on what I wanted to do with the edit. Right? Ken wanted to bring detail out in the pier. Right? But when you're doing that, you have to be really careful because this should be a really, really dark thing. I'm guessing what he did was he used this subject select, right? So I can actually see his edits here. Okay? So he selected the subject and brought the highlights up, and let's just turn this one off. Okay, so see what happens if I turn that mask off. And it looks like he's painted a little bit in here. I'm not sure why you've done it with the paintbrush, Ken. So if you're watching this later, right, it looks like he selected this with the paintbrush and did this, right? But instead of doing that, I'm actually just going to add select subject, and I'll show you what a better job it does. See how it filled in all those gaps? And I can actually just hide all of his brushwork. Okay, so he painted them in. See that? And now that's the selection that Lightroom made. Okay, so it's a much cleaner selection. And see what it's doing. Okay. Personally, I like it better like this. So all you got to do is turn your mask off. And I think you got something good. To me, this is a better edit. Okay. You want to make sure you don't overdo your editing when you come to punching up the shadows. Right. All right. Let's see. Where are we at for questions? I want to do Bjorn's because he's here as well. He sent some really cool foggy images, right? So I found this really interesting, Bjorn, because I'm guessing this was taken in Sweden, and we have some very similar, you and I had some very similar kinds of shots. So I pulled up some from my own library, and then this was in Eastern Canada, Nova Scotia, right? So little red, kind of hot in the fog. And then I also had this image, which is one of my favorite images that I actually have ever taken out in Canada, in Eastern Canada, and it looks very sort of Scandinavian. And actually, people have told me that it looks like Scandinavia, but it's Eastern Canada. So I want to show you what I did to this one, or what I would do to this one. Okay, let me just take a look here. I want to see what Bjorn is using for your software. Lightroom Classic. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to use Lightroom, and then I might hop to Luminar just to do a finish again for you. Okay, so starting the same. Now, because this is a JPEG, you'll notice that there isn't any camera profiles. Okay, so I don't know if this is your original. Did you shoot RAW on this one, Bjorn, or not? Because this is working on a JPEG. So we might see some difference here, and one of them being that I don't have the camera profiles. Okay, so I could choose a different one from Adobe, but I'm just going to leave it. The other option, or the other thing that is missing when you have JPEG, is the white balance. Okay, so you don't have the option. If I compare it to my version in the fog, okay, so I've got more options for white balance in processing when you shoot RAW. Okay, so the processing steps are exactly the same, RAW versus JPEG, but you have more options and you have more information. If you could please share the link, Rob, to the RAW versus JPEG article and why to shoot RAW, that would be really helpful for some people. All right, so I'm going to do my white. So shift, double click on whites, and then blacks. Okay, now see what happened. As soon as I increased the blacks, we got more color. And it's showing me a bit of an edge vignette here, but the whites also boosted. Okay, so it's brought the whites way up to the top. I am going to bring it down a tiny little bit. Now, if you want to get rid of fog, okay, I'm just going to reset this one. If you want to get rid of fog, there's two ways to do that. Increasing the black slider will give you more of that intense color that you're looking for, because when you have fog, it's really faded everything out. Okay, so increasing the blacks, or the dehaze slider, which basically does the same thing. Right, now you'll see what happens when I take this really far with this JPEG. You can actually see a house coming out in the background, but can you see what's happening here? It's super noisy. Okay, and that just has to do with the fact that I'm trying to pull data out of a JPEG that isn't there. Okay? If I look at the camera settings, it's also shot at ISO 640, okay, 640. Not super high ISO, but again, because it's a JPEG, this is why this is happening, okay? Camera tip here, you might have wanted to use a lower ISO. You could definitely get away with it here because you've got a really fast shutter speed, or you could have lowered the shutter speed and close the aperture down a little bit, and you would have got a little more depth of field. But honestly, the exposure is fine. We just need to not push this image so far because it's a JPEG. Okay. So I'm going to increase the blacks a little bit, but I don't want to get rid of the fog completely. Okay. If I dial the highlights down, we are starting to see a little bit more of that background. Okay. I could bring the overall exposure down. You can definitely still see the background now. We're getting into that territory again of we're going to get this weird grain showing up on the corner. Okay. I have a feeling that this image is cropped as well from the original. Let me just see. Oh, it looks like it's full size. Okay, so that's fine. The reason that I thought it might be cropped is because I'm getting this vignetting on the edges here, and that has to do with the lens corrections again. So I'm going to see if it recognizes. Okay, it doesn't recognize the lens. So see how before on Ken's image and the other one that I worked on before, it recognized the lens, my Fuji ones. So it's just not recognizing this lens. So I'm going to choose Olympus, if it will let me. It doesn't even let me choose Olympus. Let's see, 12 to 40. See, it doesn't even let me choose Olympus. I'm going to choose, does it even have Panasonic? No. Okay, so this is one drawback here is I don't have the choice of correcting the lens profile automatically. Okay, so if there's any distortion or anything that I want to correct, I'll have to do it with these sliders manually. You can look for chromatic aberration. I don't think I see any here. I'm not too worried about that, but I've checked it off anyways. And if I want to do any vignetting, so this is why I came here, was to do this actually a negative vignette. Okay, and I'll show you why. I'm going to go back up to basic and just darken the exposure. Because what I'm looking for is, see how these corners are darker? Okay, so that's a lens issue when you have a lens that darkens things on the corner. That's very common. So I'm actually just going to go in here and sort of correct for it. Do you see that really slightly? I'm just correcting for the dark corners so that they're a little bit more even. So I went back up here to dial my exposure down just to see that. Now I'm going to put it back where I had it. Okay. So that's the lens correction for under the D-vignette. Right? In terms of color, we could try an auto white balance and see if that chooses a different color. Okay, it went definitely warmer. If I want to try the eyedropper, I could select the eyedropper and then just click on the fog. I kind of like that color. It's a little bit more red, which also brings out this building. Okay. Let's see what happens if we add a little bit of clarity. So clarity is going to sort of bring out the fog, but again, it's an overall. So it's bringing out everywhere. I can't mask this, right? So I'm going to keep it low because I do like the fog and I want to keep the fog. And I think I'm just going to add the clarity and texture just to the subject. Okay, so let's do a mask and see what Lightroom finds as the subject. Okay, so not bad. It didn't pick up all of the reflection. Okay, so I could add to it if I wanted to pick up that as well. I could add to it and do luminance range in here. Okay, so now it's picked up this bottom part, which I may not want. Let's just see if I can blend that a little bit nicer. So I'm looking to blend, I'm looking at the shadow, okay, or the reflection. I'm not worried about this part down here because what I'm going to do is do a subtract. Okay. Can you see how I'm using these masks and building on one from the other? So I use the subject, then luminance range to add to it. And then I'm going to, did I click subtract? Yes. I'm going to subtract a linear gradient and just drag it up from the bottom. Okay, so I'm just going to make sure I get rid of all those bits at the bottom. So now I have the selection that I want. And now I can do things like exposure, contrast, and give it the clarity. See how that's bringing the rocks and the hut out of the fog? Okay. And we could warm them up a little bit. Okay, so I have to be careful because see how it's selecting this bit in here. So I want to be careful that I don't do too much editing because it's affecting inside that part too. Okay. So I want to just keep it subtle. Let's see what that's doing. So it's just bringing up the contrast and clarity on the house and the rock. Okay. Or it's maybe just a boathouse. Let's see what happens if I choose sky. It might have a hard time here. Oh, it actually did okay. I'm surprised. Right? Sometimes it won't pick up things like this, or it might have selected the whole thing. So if I want to darken the sky again, you have to be careful because it's not blending so well. I could try the dehaze, but again, we're getting that noise in the corner. Okay, so dehaze is not going to work on this one. And I'm going to delete this one. So I'm going to go with just the mask on the house. Let's see how far we've come. So very foggy. And we're bringing the house out a little bit. I'm going to bring the color back down. I find it's too warm now. Something like that. So in this case, if I go to add an edge vignette, okay, if I darken, Okay, we're definitely going to have to keep it soft, but it's going to be really obvious. Okay, I want to keep the edges soft. Or what happens if I go the other way? I always dial my feather down to 0 and get the positioning and the size and shape of the vignette. And if I go all the way to white and feather it, actually, let's take that larger. So we could actually do something like this, trying to blend it a little bit softer. It's not working as well. So I'm going to actually undo it and do it with a radial filter. And then I'm going to come back to questions in a moment. So I'm going to do a radial gradient. So this is what I talked about if the vignette tool is not going where you want it in Lightroom. Okay, so I'm actually going to flip it so that it's inverted in a moment. So I'm just selecting this middle part here. Then I'm going to invert it. Maybe make it a little bigger. Make sure I have a nice fade. Okay, so the two lines is whatever I'm doing on the outside is going to fade into this middle center line. Okay, so if I want to brighten, see that? Or I could go the opposite way and create more haze. So we're kind of undoing what I did with the first step, but it's just another direction that you could go. Okay. See what it's doing? And of course I could just play with the size of this and the positioning. So just a different option. But I wouldn't try to actually eliminate the fog. I'm going to undo this one. I wouldn't try to eliminate the fog. I think it's part of the charm of this image. So I would actually go with it and just work with the fog. Something like that. Okay. I might crop it a little bit as well. And I'm going to go freeform. This whole section here is right in the middle. And I don't think we need all of this bottom part because it's really not adding anything. So I'm going to bring this up. And I think that's a little bit stronger. Maybe not quite so far. About like that. I like it. Cool image. This one, I could attempt to edit, but because it's a JPEG, I don't think we're going to get anything out of it. Okay, so see how grainy it's going to become really quickly. But it's a really cool image. And once again, I had something very similar. So these are images that I shot, once again, in Eastern Canada. The same kind of idea, you know, fishing area, foggy. I literally came out from a restaurant. I was eating dinner to photograph this boat and the lights because I thought it was so interesting and I wanted to get the fog in the street here. I do want to address some of the camera settings here. Okay, so I did mine at fairly high ISO because I wasn't using a tripod. I literally just jumped out of the restaurant and I'm shooting these handheld, so 3200 ISO. This one as well. And I noticed that you used a fairly high ISO here, Bjorn. Two things. I would suggest lower ISO in this case, because if you're doing a 1 second exposure, I'm clear you're probably using a tripod, I'm guessing, because it looks sharp, this part here. Okay, so lower ISO, you could probably get away with 200 or 400. Okay, you don't need f16 here because you don't need a lot of depth of field. You could probably get away with even 2.8, okay, 2.8 or 4, and then let your shutter speed fall where it may. Okay, so I would give this one a little more exposure. Also, you see how there's not much in the midtones here, and even the light here isn't really that bright, right? If I try and do my little trick here, okay, the light itself is clipping. If I try and increase the exposure, there's no detail to be had, right? So I would kind of leave this one alone because there's not really much you can pull out of that JPEG. Just to show you something comparatively, if I go and edit this one that I shot, I'm going to try the camera profiles. I find landscape adds some blue nicely, so I'm going to go with landscape because it's usually adding some blue or green. I'm going to check my whites, and in this case, I'm going to use the Alt option instead of the double click because it's going to try and eliminate the clippings in the lights. So I'm going to increase it just until I start to see that boat part clipping. See that? And then bring it back. Now, there's no black clipping, and you would think that there should be because it's black as night. So I'm going to bring that down a little bit. And then exposure. So exposure, remember, is midtones. Now look what happens. Okay, so it's bringing up the blue. I can try different white balances. I think I shot it fairly tungsten. Okay, so I wanted to get this sky blue. This is blue hour. Let's go a little bit warmer. Somewhere in there. Okay, but see the difference, right? So my image was slightly dark as well. But when you have a raw file, you can bring so much more detail out. If I do dehaze, right, I'm going to get rid of a lot of that fog, but that was kind of what attracted me to take the picture in the first place. So I'm going to leave the fog. I might do a little bit of clarity and bring the highlights down just a touch and back to the blacks. So remember, adding the blacks will keep that contrast and the color. So I didn't do a whole lot to this one, just to punch it up a little bit. All right, how are we doing here? I'm going to come back over to the chat. You might be a little biased, Sheila. Where? Oh, yes, you're in Truro, right? Let me see if I can find this, the original image that I did of this one, because my finished image looks very different. Let's see. Where is it? Here it is. There's my finished image. Very different, right? Did I try the wire removal tool in Neo? I have, but not on that particular image, Sheila. You're welcome, Bjorn. Tell me in the chat, do you have raw files of those images? And if you do, see if you can pull more detail out of the dark one, because I do like that stark, just that light in the fog. It's like the beacon, right? And that's what drew me out. So literally I was sitting, I think, in this restaurant over here somewhere, and this was the scene. And we were shooting earlier, and we went to have supper, and it got super foggy, which you can see it here. It was foggy as well. But see how I chose not to edit the fog out, right? I brought the foreground items and the red buildings out, and I let the rest go into fog, right? Do you know the village, Sheila? Bonus points if you know where this is. It's fairly close to you. It's close to, you'll know the other famous spot, right? Close to there as well, right? So for those that don't know, that's Peggy's Cove, Nova Scotia. We're in Sheila's neighborhood now, right? And yes, your question about the reason that we were getting all the noise is because it's a JPEG. Thanks, Marty. Thanks for coming. I combine the two, Lightroom and Neo, a lot. Yeah. And there's another video, well, the one inside the course that I've given you, and there's one on YouTube as well. So if you could share the link to that one, Rob, for others that aren't in the Neo course, how to use Photoshop as a plugin or as an intermediary between Lightroom and Luminar. The other one is Peggy's Cove, but not this one, Sheila. This is not Peggy's Cove. It's close. It's close. It is Lunenburg. We actually did been in Lunenburg a couple of times, again, when Rob and I were doing our RV trip. So I believe we have to go as well. I've got more videos to make for my Luminar Neo class, And for those of you that are in the class, I'm getting some great submissions for Monday for our live, where we're going to do some very similar things to what I just demonstrated with your images in Luminar Neo. So we're going to be going right into from Luminar Neo right to the images, no intermediary. Okay, so I hope you've got some value out of watching these today. And just a reminder that Photoshop class is on Thursday, and Rob's going to share a link to that class again for you. There's 2 ways to register for the Photoshop class. If you've already done Photoshop 101 and 201, you can just sign up for this one, and the early bird prices end on Monday, so you can get it for $15 US right now. If you haven't done any of my Photoshop classes yet and you want to have the whole thing, we have a bundle for that as well. So you can buy all 3 of them for $57, and it'll give you about 12 hours worth of lessons, right? And I go right from the beginning of Photoshop, like how to use the tools, what they all are on the toolbar menu, setting up Photoshop, the whole works. Right. So if you are interested and you use Photoshop, or you have Lightroom and you have no idea how to use Photoshop, you want to use it more or better, that will probably be the class for you. And of course, submitting images for this live for next week and for future weeks, keep those coming. That is the link to submit, digitalphotomentor.com/live, to send us your images for next week's live. I'll just give an early heads up that in the next probably month or so, once it starts getting nicer outside here in our area and in the Northern Hemisphere as spring, we're going to be shifting to a new date and time for these lives. We're going to be going to Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Okay, so that will help our European friends. Actually, no, that will help our Australian friends, I believe, and our European friends come at a time that's better for them as well. So set a reminder on the Digital Photo Mentor YouTube live, and that's the page that you're literally watching right now. Set a reminder and a notice for yourself, and when we make a time change, I will be letting everybody know. See you guys Monday. Oh, Images West is Lois. Awesome. Thank you. So if you're not sure about setting your time on your calendar, there's a handy time conversion, and I'll find that for you in one moment. I'm trying not to sneeze. There was the sneeze. I'll give the time converter for you. And this one, so next week, my cat is currently breaking into my office. So next week at 1 o'clock. So this is our current time. I'll share this in the chat for you. And the time that we're going to be moving to is eventually, we're not doing it just yet, probably May, right? And that's going to be this time. So this is a handy time converter that you can use to plug in your own city, and it will tell you what time it is happening in your area. And yes, Stephanie, I have allergies, and this time of year is really bad. So yes, hay fever for sure. No dog walking on Wednesday. Oh, poor doggy. Just walk earlier, Stephanie. He can have a walk. He or she can have a walk earlier. And yes, my cat has broken in. So it is time for us to say goodbye for today. And I hope to see you, some of you on Monday in the Neo course, and the rest of you next week. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel, and invite a friend. Next week, come back and tell your friends to come with you, because guess what? It's free, and it's always free here on YouTube. Take care, and we'll see you next week.